Actually, this blanket clashes with my shirt. Hi guys, it's Erin. Today I'm going to do a kind of truncated version of the mid-year book freakout tag, and then at the end I'll also update you just very briefly on my reading because it is July 1st. What? When did that happen? I feel like January was like 6 months long, but then every other month after that has just been so short. So, wow. All right, anyway, let's get started. So I've linked the original creators in the description box below. This tag is everywhere right now, and it's just kind of a fun way to think about your reading in the middle of the year and kind of assess where you are with your reading goals, and just, I don't know, I like talking about books. So the first question I'm going to answer is the best book you have read so far in 2019. This one I was like, ooh, that's hard, and then it wasn't. So it was hard because I have had a really great reading year. There have been very few books that I've read that I just genuinely didn't like. Yeah, really. I can't actually think of one right now. After thinking about it for a minute and being like, wow, I have had a great reading year, there was one book that really stood out to me, and that was actually the first book that I read this year. That was The Summer Tree by Guy Gavriel Kay. This just sort of surprised me. I have been reading fantasy for a really long time, young adult. I'm not a huge fan of adult fantasy. It tends to be too gritty. And so I went into this hesitantly, but with hopes, because Guy Gavriel Kay helped Christopher Tolkien edit The Silmarillion. So I thought, you know, of all of the writers in the world, Christopher Tolkien picked this one to trust with his father's stories, so he can't be a terrible writer or storyteller. And oh my gosh, it just blew me away. What really struck me about this book, like, it's a portal fantasy, a group of young adults. They're like in graduate school or law school, so, you know, kind of mid-20s, get brought into this fantasy world called Finnevar, and ostensibly they're there for the celebration of the High King's 50th anniversary of his accession. Anyway, it's been 50 years since he became king. There's a party. They're supposed to be there for the party, but then of course the world blows up, kind of literally. Anyway, one of those, you know, once in 1,000 years we have to defeat the evil kinds of stories, which I really like. And there was just, it was so surprising. I really enjoyed the story, but just the twists and turns you never see coming, and they're so delightful, and sometimes I'm just like so overwhelmed by what's happening I just have to stop. And it's been a really long time since I've experienced a story that's had that kind of emotional impact on me. It might not have happened since The Lord of the Rings. For fantasy, for high fantasy, for sure. Maggie Stiefvater, maybe. But anyway, so this is like all-time favorite book. The best sequel you've read so far in 2019 is, surprise, The Wandering Fire, which is the sequel to The Summer Tree. I'm actually in the middle of the third book right now. I wanted to savor the story, so I put it aside for a while. Stuff continues to happen. It is just so good. Such a good story. I love it. As you can see, I've spent 5 minutes talking about it. The next question I'm going to answer is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I don't read a ton of new releases or like anticipate a ton of new releases. Like, honestly, a lot of my reading is like, you know, classics are like the backlist from 300 years ago. So when I read a book from the last 50 years, it feels really recent. But there are a couple of authors that I really love, whose books I'm really excited about. One of those is Maggie Stiefvater's Call Down the Hawk. That's definitely the book that I'm the most excited about, the new release that I'm most excited about this year. It takes place after the Raven Cycle, and it follows one of the main characters from the Raven Cycle. The other book that I'm really, really excited about is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. She wrote The Night Circus, which is one of my favorite books of all time. She hasn't written another book since then, and it's been like 10 years, and I'm just really excited to see what else she has written. Another book that I'm interested in and have become more and more interested in as the year has gone on is a history called Dominion by Tom Holland. I really enjoy Tom Holland's historical writing. Usually he writes books about the classical period, so I think the first book of his that I read was Rubicon, which was about Julius Caesar basically and the fall of the Roman Republic, and it was so fascinating, and it really helped me contextualize some of the classics that I was teaching at the time, which was great. Dominion is about how Christianity has shaped Western culture, and I'm really interested to see what he has to say about that. Since we're all about the classics here, in addition to the new releases, here are a couple of classics that I'm just really I've been wanting to read and I'm hoping to get to in the second half of this year. There's a long list because as I will, let's just pause and have a brief classics challenge update. How am I doing? Terribly. So in order to kind of keep pace with the Classics Club and the other Classics Challenge, Back to the Classics, I should have read like 5 classics from those lists, which overlap, by now, and I haven't. I've read like 3, which isn't terrible. A lot of them are short. I don't know if I'll get to them. My reading load in the spring was a lot higher than the one that I had last fall, so when I made all of these challenges and set all of the stuff up for myself in January, I was basing my understanding of like how much I was going to be able to read on my fall semester, and then my spring semester was just like a whole thing. So we're not where we want to be. But here are a couple of the classics that, one of them actually wasn't on my initial list, but it's made it onto the list now. I've actually started both of these, so hopefully we can get them done this summer and I can move on to other things. So first, the one that I have been meaning to get to for literally 6 months is The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. One of my reading goals was to read all of the works of George Eliot this year. I'm certainly going to read all of the works of George Eliot, and I'm reading them in publication order, but I might not finish them all this year. It's a thing. This is the second book that she published, The Mill on the Floss. I have a friend actually who read it this spring and just said it was fantastic. So I'm enjoying it so far. I'm about 120 pages in, and I really just need to sit down and start reading. But I needed a little bit of a break at the end of the semester. After I finished The Woman in White, I have just been reading a lot of like fluffy rom-com, like women's fiction, which I have really enjoyed. Just reading something that's purely for fun. It's been really nice. I don't know why my throat is scratchy all of a sudden, but I'm starting to kind of want to get back into reading things that make my brain work a little bit more. So this is definitely next on the list. And then also a book that I want to finish really badly is Lawrence Stern's The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy Gentleman. I finally found a copy in the wild this week. I do try when I don't need a book to purchase it at a local bookstore or buy it used instead of ordering it online, and this beauty was waiting for me on the shelf of my local half-price books. So I'm super excited about this. I decided I wanted to read this because this spring, one of the things that I read was an unpublished diary that was written by this young man who lived in New Jersey in the very beginning of the 1800s, and he recorded, a lot of stuff, but he talked about his reading a lot. And for that class, I wrote my paper on his reading, but one of his favorite books was Tristram Shandy, and I had never read it, and it just seemed like he just so clearly loved it that I was really curious about it. And I'm like 50 pages in, and I can totally understand why he liked it so much. So it's kind of cool. Like, I feel like I'm getting to know somebody by reading their favorite book, but it's like 200 years ago. It's weird, but kind of cool. Anyway, so this is what I am reading right now, actually. And of course, there's like a whole long list. I will link my my classics challenge video below if you want to go and look at that. Like I said, I have read about 3 of those books, which is fine because I've been reading other classics like this one. One of the other questions, I don't know what we're on, is biggest surprise. So we were assigned to this. This is Pierre by Herman Melville, and I have read Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and some of his short fiction. So I had decent idea of what I was getting myself into. This was his, I think, last published novel, published in 1852. It was critically panned, like, with lots of sick burns. Nobody liked it. Melville was like, fine, I'll go write short stories. This book feels very modern in a weird way because of what it explores, and it's just so unique and different that I was just absolutely delighted when I read it, which it's not really a story you're supposed to be delighted by. I don't know. Anyway, this is about a young man named Pierre who lives a kind of idyllic life in upstate New York, and then one day he gets contacted by this young woman who is very beautiful, of course, and she is like, I need to talk to you. He goes and talks to her. She says, I'm pretty sure I'm your half-sister. And then in order to protect her and also his deceased father's reputation, he decides to fake marry her and go to New York and try to make a living as a writer. It's nuts. It really is. And I love it. It's great. It's like a satire of all kinds of stuff. It's hilarious. Such a surprise and delight. That was like something that we were supposed to read in the middle of the semester, and I was kind of like, if I read a summary, it'll be fine. And then I didn't want to read a summary. Favorite new author, or new to me? Probably Guy Gavriel Kay, for sure. Not probably. Guy Gavriel Kay. Favorite new author. I am slowly but surely planning, once I finish The Fin of Our Tapestry, I'm going to start reading his other works. He's been writing since the 80s, and he's still publishing new stuff, so there's a lot of backlists, which is great. Another writer that I really like is Penny Reid. Right now she's an independent writer. She writes romance, but her kind of like thing is smart romance. So the stories are about people who fall in love, as opposed to the like love part being the focus. I mean, it still is. It's still a romance book, but I really like the way she writes. They're clever and funny, and her characters are really well fleshed out, and they feel realistic. So even when the heroine meets a guy who happens to be a bajillionaire and run his own company or whatever, like, it still just feels realistic. One of the things that I dislike about romance is a lot of the time I'm like, yeah, but would she really meet that guy? Would he really, like, it just feels a little too fantastical. So anyway, I really like her. She's been a pleasant surprise. I have read almost all of her backlist. That's what I've been reading the month of June, in case you were wondering. Which brings me to the next question. What is a book that made you happy? Everything she wrote, but particularly this one, which I actually bought the like real version of instead of just reading on my Kindle. After I read it on my Kindle, I bought the hard copy. This is Beer Science. It's the third book in the Winston Brothers series, which is a series about these 6 brothers who all fall in love. What I really like is that they build on each other, and the last one, which is coming out this fall, has been kind of like, she's been working towards it since the first book, which is really cool. I really appreciate seeing writers who do stuff like that, who kind of like are planning ahead. And so you can read each book as a standalone, but also they work together as a series, which is really cool. It has a kind of found family vibe. Also, this one in particular, which I really like they're these brothers, but the woman in this, her name is Jennifer Sylvester, and her home life isn't great. She's 22, she's still living with her parents. They're kind of domineering, bordering on emotionally abusive in the case of her father, which she comes to kind of recognize. Like, she just thought that's how things were. And I really like Jennifer's character arc. She goes from being this kind of like meek, quiet person to not learning to have opinions. She already had opinions. She just like becomes more confident sharing them, and that leads her to love, and it leads her to kind of personal freedom, which she finds first, which I think is really important. That the brother, his name is Cletus, who helps her, is and then falls in love with her, of course. He helps her by pushing her in the right direction, but like when she needs him to back off, he does. This is the kind of thing that I like about Penny Reid's books. Like, the relationships are very healthy, and I really enjoy that. So anyway, I have rambled on about my love for this one too much. Also, mostly because I haven't reviewed it Sorry. The most beautiful book that I have bought or received this year is probably this little guy I saw, and I didn't need it, but I did, and so I got it. This is from like the 1960s. It's a collection of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet Sequence, and not only is the cover just really lovely, I say the 1960s confidently, I am guessing, but then there's a lovely little like black and white silhouette illustration that goes with each of the sonnets, which I think is really lovely. So I haven't actually read this yet, but I've read a lot of the sonnets, but not all of them in sequence. I will do that someday with this lovely book. What do I need to read for the rest of the year? This is gonna move me into my kind of like more general overview portion, and I'm gonna keep it really brief, I promise. General, vague stuff. If you're curious about what my challenges were specifically, I'll link the videos in the description box. If you're curious about like what I've read, my Goodreads account is linked below. My Goodreads account is not actually updated, unfortunately. I need to work on that. But I think I've read about 75 books so far this year, which was my goal. So that's great. I didn't know how many books I would be able to read this semester and like in the spring. And not only did I read quite a lot of books, but I had a spell like over spring break where I read a bunch of like short historical fiction mystery books that kind of bolstered my thing, and then those penny read novels helped a lot. So yay, I made my Goodreads reading goal. My pace is slower than it was last year. At this time last year I had read more than 100 books, but also like I wasn't doing very much at this point last year, and I've been busy, so that's how life goes. Of my 19 books that I want to read in 2019, I have read 5, which actually isn't terrible, and a couple of the ones on the list aren't out yet. So, you know. So the 5 that I have read are Virgil Wander, The Summer Tree by Guy Gabriel Kay, Paul in Fresh Perspective by N.T. Wright, The Temple by George Herbert, which I wrote a paper on, Prior of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and The Bear and the Serpent by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I did make that list with books that I had in January and wanted to read, so like it makes sense that I read a lot of them then. And then my Back to the Classics challenge. Oh, I am doing very badly. I'm in the middle of The Mill on the Floss, which is a 19th century classic, and I read Tamburlaine by Christopher Marlowe, which I decided to be my classic play. This one might die. I'm okay with that. And then as far as the Classics Club goes, I have read 2 books, I think, at this point, so I should probably get to work on that. That is how my reading year is going, although I have sort of like officially like failed at a lot of my challenges for myself. I don't really care. Setting challenges in January is fun. I like having reading goals and just kind of thinking about my reading life and thinking about the way I want it to go. And I've found in the last couple of years that even when I don't meet all of my challenges, usually whatever the rationale behind undertaking that challenge was, whether it's to read more new books or to read more backlist or to read more classics or just to like reread books less, which has been a challenge that I've had. Those are the kinds of like overall goals that I always have for myself, and usually even if I fail at the like reading a certain number of books or something, I find that I have succeeded in doing the ones that are kind of more intangible, which is really what I'm after. So anyway, I would love to hear about your reading. How is it going? Can you believe it's July? I can't believe it's July. And thanks for watching. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye. Contortions. Can I put it on my head? Ooh, that was bad. Okay, we're done.